He waited on the stoop until twilight, pretending to watch the sun melt into the dirty gray Harlem sky. Up and down the street, transistor radios clicked on and hummed into the sour air. Men dragged out card tables, laughing. Cars cruised through the garbage and broken glass, older guys showing off their Friday night girls. Another 5 minutes, he thought. I'll give James another 5 minutes. You still here, Alfred? Aunt Pearl came out on the stoop, her round face damp from the kitchen. He tried to sound casual. You know, James, he better hurry it or we'll miss the first picture. He's never been this late, Alfred. Why don't you go upstairs and call his house? Maybe he's sick. James ain't sick. Alfred stood up. How you know that? Her eyes narrowed. You know where he's at? Maybe. He's hanging out with those worthless punks, ain't he, Alfred? Maybe you just better... Alfred! But he was already off the stoop and moving fast, his sneakers slapping on the sidewalk. Packs of little kids, raggedy and skinny, raced past him along the gutter's edge, kicking empty beer cans ahead of them. Used to do that too when we were little, he thought. One thing I could always do better than James. I was always faster. Big deal. He slowed down. He stood at the mouth of the alley and took a deep breath. What am I? James' shadow or something? I don't need him. But he marched to the basement steps and plunged down into the clubroom. Hollis and Sonny were sprawled on the long, sagging couch, snapping their fingers to a scratchy record. Major was flexing his arm muscles as he cracked mirror over the mop sink. Only James, trying to read a magazine in the dim light of the naked bulb, looked up. Hey man, what's happening? Nothing much, said Alfred. Ready to go to the movies? Not unless it's free tonight, said James. I got some money, said Alfred. Major turned slowly and let his muscles relax. How much you got, Alfred? Sonny and Hollis stopped snapping. Nothing, mumbled Alfred, staring down at the tips of his sneakers. You the only one working, and you got paid today, said Major. What you got? Give it to my aunt, said Alfred. Give it to my aunt, mimicked Major. You such a good, sweet boy. Old Uncle Alfred. Sonny giggled, and Hollis grinned, buck-toothed. James looked away. Don't you know this club got dues? Major folded his arms across his bulging t-shirt. Hollis leaned back in the couch. Go collect the dues, Sonny. Turn Alfred upside down and make the dues fall out of his pockets. Turn Alfred upside down, echoed Sonny, blankly. He stood up, taller than any of them and almost as heavy-muscled as Major. Upside down. Hold on, said James. Alfred's my guest. I invited him to come down. Alfred took a step backwards, nearly knocking over an olden wooden chair. Let's go, James. Major swaggered across the room, the metal tips on his pointed shoes clicking on the concrete floor. How much them Jews give you for slaving, Uncle Alfred? Jews squeeze the eagle till it screams, said Hollis. The eagle screams, faster, Alfred. Sweep that floor, you skinny. They've been all right to me, said Alfred. How come you ain't working right now, said Major, circling until he stood between Alfred and the door. Groceries closed. At 8 o'clock? They close early on Friday to go to synagogue. They go pray for more dollars, said Hollis. Even James smiled. No, said Alfred. The Epsteins are very religious. They don't even touch money after sundown on Fridays. It's a lie, said Major. No, they even leave money in the cash register so they don't have to. He bit his lip. Water dripped in the mop sink, small explosions in the suddenly silent room. Let's get it, whispered Hollis. Show us, said Major. No, you're just a slave, sneered Major. You was born a slave, you're gonna die a slave. Slave, echoed Sonny. I see you now, boy old and stooped, said Major, shuffling to the center of the room. Old and stooped. You be scratching your head and saying, Yes, sir, Mr. Lou. Let me brush them hairs off your coat. Yes, sir, Mr. Jake. I'll be pleased if you allow me to wash your car. Sonny and Hollis began to laugh as Major shuffled around the dim, warm room, his muscular arms dangling like a monkey's, his eyes rolling, his black head bobbing in ugly imitation of an old-time Negro servant. I can see you now, Alfred. Good old Uncle Alfred. Yes, sir, Mr. Ben. I've been so gratified. If you kick me now and again, show me how much you white folks love us. The laughter rose, high-pitched and nervous. Alfred peeked at their faces, black and sweating in a semicircle around him. Hollis and Sonny grinning and nodding. James' chubby face was set and unsmiling as Major continued his imitation, scratching his nose, pouting his lips, and shambling loosely like a puppet at the end of a jerk in strings. Alfred's hands were wet. You come on with us, said James. You know just where to. We don't need him if he's scared, said Hollis. He isn't scared. Not him, said James. Look, Alfred, you don't owe them anything. They gave me a job, said Alfred, surprised at how far his own voice sounded. Big job, said Hollis. Yes, sir, yelled Major, shuffling back into the center. Mr. Lou, I've been sweeping out your store 40 years now. How about giving me delivery groceries on the bicycle once in a while? Alfred swallowed hard. They was the only ones that gave me a job when I quit school, he yelled. They fell quiet again. You come on, Alfred, said James softly. Why'd you been stealing from us for 300 years? You're just going to take some back. No. You could stay outside, be a lookout, said James. Major shouldered in between them. Coming? Alfred shook his head. Let's go, said Major, moving toward the door. He turned at the first step, sending Hollis at his heels. James? Let's go to the movies, James, said Alfred. That's all you ever want to do, said James. They stared at each other. You coming, James, or are you going to be a slave too? James turned away. He followed the others up the steps to the street. The door banged shut behind them. Fool, thought Alfred. Had to open your mouth. He kicked the chairs across the room. Good kick, man. Where's everybody going in such a hurry? Henry limped down into the clubroom, dragging his crippled left leg. The perpetual grin spread across his skinny face. Alfred shrugged. Play some cards? I gotta go, Henry. Hey, Alfred. You know what I'm doing now? Mr. Donatelli, the fight manager, he's letting me. Where are you going? Out. The stench of wine and garbage still hung in the moist June air. He jammed his hands into the pockets of the tight blue slacks, watching the cars cruise past. Another year, he thought. Be 18, able to drive. Sure. On grocery boy pay. Slave. The bells of the ice cream truck jangled across the street, and a sudden roar burst from a dozen transistor radios. Somebody must have hit a home run. The Epsteins would be in the synagogue now, wearing skull caps and praying. He started to walk toward his house, and stopped. Aunt Pearl would be sitting on the stoop, waving the fan the undertaker gave away at summer funerals. She would ask him why he wasn't with James. She would know if he was lying. He went back down to the clubroom. Henry was punching at his reflection in the cracked mirror. He dropped his hands when he saw Alfred, and the big grin turned sheepish. Shadowboxing, he said. Yeah. Mr. Donatelli's letting me work around the gym, take care of the gloves, and wash the mouthpieces. Big job. You want to come up, Alfred? Willie Streeter's training now. He's going to fight in Madison Square Garden next week. Yeah. Lot of guys come up and train. Yeah. Hey man, where are you? Out on the street again? He idly watched a green and white police cruiser slide by, a thick, hairy white arm hanging out of the open window. Alfred stiffened. The burglar alarm, the new silent burglar alarms installed at the Epsteins the other night. How could I forget about that? They'd never hear it go off. It would ring in the detective's office, and they'd call the police right away. He began to run. Gotta get to James. Got to tell James. But the radio inside the police car began to cackle and sputter, as if it had read his mind. The car suddenly picked up speed. Silently, a second police car joined the first. Then both wheeled around the corner, roaring into noise and light, motors growling, headlights glaring, sirens howling. Alfred slowed down as hundreds of people came off stoops and street corners and poured out of bars toward 4 cruisers parked behind Epstein's. The door of the police cars were open and the red roof lights were blinking. He heard shouts and a voice yelled, "Stop! Stop!" A shot rang out. The warning shot. He started running again toward the shot. The crowd thickened in front of him. "They caught one!" Someone yelled from an upstairs window. The crowd surged forward, sweeping Alfred along. He tried to push through, but the crowd was too tightly packed. "The man," mumbled a voice off to his left, "always looking to put his foot on a black throat." "You're saying the truth, brother. Only reason police up here to watch out for them white stores." "So right." Police cars slammed shut and the cruisers drove away, their sirens on. The crowd began to drift back to their stoops, to the drinks they had left on bars. Alfred passed an old man who lived in his old building and grabbed his arm. "You see who they caught?" The old man shook his head. "They hustled him away too fast." "Just one?" "A couple got away." Alfred pushed his way out of the crowd and onto a side street. He had to think. The 3 who got away would split up and hide. If James made it, there would only be one place for him to go. Alfred circled toward the park, his hands in his pockets, his head low. He kept his feet moving slowly. Police cars cruised by and he felt eyes staring out at him. "Keep walking slow." It was quiet in the park. Couples were drinking and whispering on the grass, and the transistors were turned down. He saw the rock, big as a truck, outlined against a purple-black sky, and his feet moved faster over the small rocks, over the low thicket of bushes. He dropped to his knees and wiggled through the tangle of stunted, twisted trees that hid the opening beneath the huge rock. On his elbows, he crawled into the cave. He had forgotten how small it was. He could barely sit up. The thin layer of loose dirt on the flat rock floor was cool against his palms, and his head touched the jagged rock ceiling. He drew his knees up to his chest and held them. He slowed his breathing and strained his ears for James. He tried to remember the first time he had been in the cave. 10 years ago. James was there too. He was hardly ever in the cave without James. Alfred squeezed against the back. James up front, poking out his head to see if the coast was clear. They were just little boys then, running away from older boys, like Major, who tried to hold them for nickels on the street. They'd break and run when they saw Major coming, circle around till they were out of sight, and sprint into the park. They scrambled through the underbrush into the cave, shaking and out of breath, clapping their hands over each other's mouths to muffle their laughter. After a while, James might start his imitations. He would be Mrs. McCormick, the public school principal, pressing his lips together until they almost disappeared, fluttering his eyelids. "Children, without education, man is a savage beast." They collapse into hiccuping laughter. Then James might screw up his face and make his eyes bulge, like Rick, the white college boy who ran the summer program. "Gotta hang in there, guys. Can't lose if you hang in there." He liked Rick, who showed them how professional basketball players took foul shots and how to throw curveballs. They're getting good, too, till Major and Sonny and Hollis began hanging around the playground, making remarks and picking balls out of their hands. One summer, Rick just didn't come back. Twig snapped outside. "James?" he whispered. There's a soft, scampering sound, and quiet again. Squirrel. James found the cave the summer they were rock hunting. James had a library book on rocks, and they spent days just wandering around the park, filling their pockets with little rocks that matched the pictures in the book. For a while, they just kept their rocks in the cave. Then James took them home. He was going to arrange them in a cardboard box and bring them to school in September. James' father had come home drunk one night, and dropped all the rocks down the air shaft. Far away, a police siren whined. Alfred shivered. Come on, James, make it, man, get away. He moved his head, and dirt fell off the ceiling of the cave into his eyes and mouth. He remembered the night his own father left home forever. He was 10. James sat with him then in the cave. They talked. Made him feel a little better. And James was there 3 years later when Alfred's mother died of pneumonia in the city hospital, sitting with him all night whispering, "Gonna be all right, Alfred. I'm gonna stick by you. We're partners, right?" Then they crawled out of the cave, and James walked him back to his new home with Aunt Pearl and her 3 little daughters. Come on, James, where are you? Alfred's legs began to cramp and stiffen. Tears streamed down his cheeks. James tried to talk him into staying in school. Can't get a good job without that piece of paper, Alfred. James is going to be an engineer and build things. Alfred could help him. They make a fortune and drive back to the neighborhood in a white Cadillac and go right to the cave, crawl on the ground in their silk suits, and pull out any little kids they found in there and buy them something really fine. Never gonna happen now. I quit school, and after all that talk, James quits 4 months later. He pinched his calves to stop his legs from falling asleep. 5 minutes? Give him another 5 minutes. James didn't even look for a job. Started hanging out with Major and Hollis. Believing them when they said that a white man would never let him build anything but garbage heaps. He started going to the club room in the basement of the building where Henry's father was superintendent. Maybe the partnership started busting up then. Only James had come to the movies tonight, like every other Friday night. And that burglar alarm? How could I forget about that burglar alarm? He moved his head again and tasted more dirt. Maybe the police caught James. Or maybe he got away. He had a better place to hide now. With Major. Slowly, he crawled out. It was pitch dark. The big rock was hard to see against the black sky. The transistors were silent. He crept carefully until no one who might be watching could tell where he had come from. Then he stood up and walked home. The side streets were quieter now. His legs began to lose their stiffness. He turned down his street. Why, it's good old Uncle Alfred. He froze. Major's arms were folded across his chest, and Hollis's lips were pulled back in a bucktooth grin. Where's James? Where's James? Mimicked Major. They got him, you... snarled Hollis, pushing Sonny towards Alfred. Then the 4 of them were in a tight pile of swinging arms and legs, kicking, cuffing, punching, and Alfred smashed on the pavement under Sonny, and the elbows and fists began crashing to his sides, his head, his stomach. You knew about that alarm, grunted Major, hammering down on him. I forgot, I would have... Alfred tasted his own blood, warm and salty, and he felt the pavement scrape the skin off his shoulder blades. He struggled, trying to kick upwards. The 3 of them were too much, bearing down, slugging, stomping. Split, hissed Major, and they were standing. We'll get you. And they were gone. Far down the block, 2 patrolmen, one black, one white, walked lightly. Looking over each other's shoulders, glanced up at the rooftops. Alfred dragged himself into an alley and crawled painfully behind a garbage can. He swallowed back his nausea as a rat scurried over his arm, squealing. The 2 policemen whirled at the sound, hands on their guns. They looked at each other, shrugged, and walked on. Alfred fainted. Chapter 2. He woke up in his aunt's bed, blinking against the white glare of the morning sun. He felt her calloused hand move gently over his swollen jaw long before he saw her red-rimmed eyes peering down at him. How do you feel, Alfred, honey? Her voice, usually so warm and light, sounded husky and tired. I'm okay, Aunt Pearl. Thank the Lord. She lowered herself to the edge of the narrow bed. We was so scared for you, Alfred. Prayed all night, prayed to God and to your sweet mama, rest her soul. Got right down on. It's okay, Aunt Pearl. I'm okay. He moved his legs under the sheet, then his arms, numb, aching pain everywhere, but everything moving, nothing broken. What happened, Alfred? When Henry and Mr. Johnson carried you? Henry? He found you. You was wandering around with your eyes shut, and he went and got his daddy to help you carry you home. What happened, Alfred? The, old stone fence at Lennox. Aunt Pearl, I was walking on it, and, a big dog jumped up, knocked me off. Uh-huh, she said. They could see by her eyes she knew he was lying. She turned, and he saw his 3 little cousins jammed in the doorway, staring at him. You heard what happened. Now you go out and play. Go ahead, give Alfred a chance to rest. Charlene, you be sure you're all back for supper. Mrs. Elverson's having a party. I'll be bringing home all kinds of good things. The twins began to edge back. Charlene kept staring. It seemed to Alfred that her eyes were red-rimmed too. Go on now. Aunt Pearl waited until they had clattered out of the apartment and down the tenement stairs before she turned back to Alfred. She was frowning. James was arrested last night, Alfred. We're trying to break into Epstein's. I know. You knew about him going? Yes. But you wasn't with him, that right? That's right. He wanted you to go. That right? When he didn't answer, she leaned closer. Who beat you, Alfred? I fell off a fence. She shook her head, her hands again on his aching face. Oh, Alfred. It's like you're my own son. I know you try so hard. You so good. I know it ain't easy living here. Someday we're gonna move away, Alfred, and we... She began to cry softly. After a while, she rose and smoothed the front of her cotton dress. I got to go to work now, Alfred. Be back about 8 tonight. You rest. There's some food by the bed. You eat something right now. She paused at the door and forced a smile. Weakly, he waved back and slipped again into sleep. It was noon when he woke again. His head felt clear. The pain in his arms and legs seemed to have eased. Biting carefully on aching teeth, he ate some bread and cheese and bologna she had left by the bed and drank some of the milk, now warm. Street sounds floated up through the open window, children yelling, the thud of a rubber ball against pavement. 4 voices singing, Hey baby, you number 1, you're... Cars honking Saturday strollers out of their way. Far off, he heard a police siren knife through all the street noise. He felt it in his belly. James is in jail. He burrowed deeper into the bed. It was his fault, letting it slip about the money in the cash register. His fault again for not remembering about the new burglar alarm. Nice bed, soft and safe, away from all of them, he thought. Major and Hollis out on the street, looking to get me. The Epsteins will be asking questions on Monday morning. You know James is my best friend. Was my best friend. No partner, nothing. Stay in bed, man. Curl up like a baby. Close your eyes, make the world go away. The big white world, full of cans to stack and floors to sweep and pails of garbage to drag out back. Big job. Maybe James is right to try to get some of that money. Only wrong to get caught. And stay in bed, man, until you're 18. Then join the army. No, stay in bed. He made himself get up then, pushing his long, wiry legs over the edge of the bed, standing on the little throw rug until the quivering stopped. He went into the bathroom and patted cold water on his face before he looked at himself in the mirror. There were specks of dry blood on his hair. His left eye was swollen and bloodshot. His bony face was puffy, especially around the jaw and lips. He had a long scratch on the side of his nose and another high on his right cheek. Not so bad. Looked worse than that time I really did fall off the stone fence. He grinned. Major and Hollis, for all their talk, they can't even rob a store or beat up a guy. Just punks. Then he remembered that James was in jail. And the grin disappeared. He walked in the front room and sat down on the worn couch that opened into a double bed for Charlene and the twins. He turned on the television set. A slim, pretty white woman was standing in a shiny kitchen as big as Aunt Pearl's apartment, telling her tall, handsome husband how worried she was about Billy. He was spending all his free time in the garage and wouldn't let anybody in except Gus, the dog. The husband puffed on his pipe and said he'd look into it, dear, and went outside, walking across a big lawn and under trees. He knocked on the garage door. Billy yelled, "Who's there?" Dad yelled back, "The FBI!" And there was a tiny sounding laughter. Billy yelled, "Just a minute, Dad." And there he was, about 14, scrambling around trying to hide the robot he was building. "Yeah, sure," said Alfred, snapping off the television. He went back into his aunt's bedroom. 4 voices on the street were getting louder. "Number 1, on my top 10, you're..." But as soon as Alfred's head touched the pillow, he was falling again into sleep. The 3rd time he woke, it was dusk. An occasional peal of drunken laughter drowned out the hoarse yells of tired children, and the stoop chatter and the muted noise of a dozen transistors on different stations. He got up and went to the kitchen, enjoying the coolness of the cracked linoleum under his bare feet. The fold-away bed he usually slept in was tucked behind the refrigerator. He wondered if Aunt Pearl had slept in it, or stayed up all night. The sharp blue slacks he had worn were in a corner, next to Aunt Pearl's box of dusting rags. They were shredded. He put on a pair of clean cotton pants and the blue tennis shirt with the little alligator on the pocket that Mrs. Elverson had given him for Christmas. He slipped on the black loafers that Jeff had outgrown. Cousin Jeff. Be hearing about him tomorrow. He let himself out of the apartment quietly, so quietly that he surprised 2 drug addicts fumbling in the hall toilet. They looked up, startled, and saw it was only Alfred, and went back to their spoons and needles. For a moment, he thought they were lucky. They'd be getting out of the world for a little bit while. Then he remembered all the old-looking, sick junkies he saw in the streets, hunched up, desperate for a fix. "Major and Sonny been looking for you," said a little boy on the stoop. Alfred nodded, trying to look cool. He went a few blocks out of his way so he could walk down an avenue where he knew he wouldn't meet Major. There were big cats there that even Major was afraid of, out to get him for something or other. The cars were still cruising, guys with their Saturday night girls, guys looking for Saturday night girls. Live music floated out an upstairs apartment, and there was a burst of laughter. Alfred jammed his hands in his pockets and walked faster. Half a dozen boys his age lounged on a corner, and one of them called to him. He just put his head down and walked on. A couple strolled by, arm in arm. He looked up once and saw Henry cross the street, dragging his bad leg and smiling as if being crippled was the best thing in the world. Probably coming back from the gym, thought Alfred. Maybe tonight Mr. Donatelli let him wash the fighter's socks. Then he remembered that Henry had brought him home, and he dropped to his knees behind a parked car. When passers-by stared at him, he pretended he was searching for a lost coin. He waited until Henry had turned the corner. He didn't feel like thanking anyone for anything tonight. He crossed the street and started down a block he hardly ever walked on. A block of low apartment buildings, a storefront church, a delicatessen, a pawn shop, and on the corner, a bar. Above the bar, on a dusty plate glass window, were the faded letters, Dr. Arthur Corey, dentist. Above that, on a dustier window, and even more faded letters, Donatelli's gym. A light was burning. He stood in the corner for a long time, looking up at the dim light until his neck hurt and his eyes watered. The jukebox was blaring through the open door of the bar, but he barely heard it. Donatelli's gym. The door leading up to the dentist's office and the gym were sagging off its hinges, half open. Beyond it was darkness. Donatelli's gym. Joe Louis had worked out here once. He remembered his father talking about how he had gone over to watch. Maybe Sugar Ray Robinson, too. There were no slaves. They didn't have to bust into anybody's grocery store. They made it. And they got to be somebody. He thought about going into the darkness, up to the dim light on the 3rd floor. Maybe if James is around, we could both. He turned to walk away and saw the familiar, muscular figure moving toward him with that rolling swagger. Major! Alfred bolted across the street, sidestepping the taxicab by inches, ignoring the horns and curses of braking drivers. On the other side, he glanced over his shoulder and stopped. It was Major after all. Slave. Always going to be running. Alfred? You're running alone? He waited until the light turned green for him, and he strode back across the street, up to the door. A quivering chill ran up his legs, and his teeth began to grind and a ball of ice formed in the pit of his stomach, and he took a breath and plunged through the door. Into the darkness, a choking, musty darkness that stank of stale wine and antiseptic and sweat and urine and liniment. He hit the first step, feeling it sag under him. He kept going. Up wooden steps so worn, so smooth his loafers slipped backwards. But the chilly legs were getting warmer now. But one after another. Alfred, panting, huffing, low steps, hundreds of them. Thousands of them in the darkness. The stairs so steep, he sometimes fell to all fours, scrambling higher. Past the sign, Dr. DeCory, past the sign. Jim, third floor. Faster until his breath tangled in his ribs. Higher until his throat was dry. Faster, higher, until a door loomed before him. Jim. Faint light leaked through a crack, and he hurled himself at it. Paused, took another breath, and plunged into a large, murky room. Yeah? A short, stocky man with a crew-cut white hair looked up. His pale face was smooth and hard. I'm Alfred Brooks, he said, gasping. I come to be a fighter. The stocky man did not smile or change his expression. Okay, Alfred Brooks, he said. Take off your shirt.